Today's daf we're going to learn is Eruvin Daf Tzaditet. I would like to dedicate this week's learning in memory of my grandmother, Sarah Bat Yitzchak and Yenta Rachel Zichrona Lebracha, who passed away on Shabbat. Thank you to the amazing Hadran Zoom and local Hadran communities who got together to make a donation to Hadran in her name, and also specifically to Gita Neufeld and Mark and Debbie Ziering, who sponsored Dapim specifically in her name. My grandmother was a very special woman who was incredibly resilient and rebuilt her life a number of times, beginning with her first move at age 14, leaving her parents behind, in Vienna in 1939, never to see them again. We will miss you terribly, Grandma, but you have taught us many, many life lessons. And today's daf is dedicated by Rebecca Schwartzmer for Refuah Shlema for her aunt, Debbie Ginsburg, Devorah Bat Rachel v'Netanel HaKohen. We're going to start at the Mishnah on Sadi Chet Amud Bet. Omer Adam bereshut hayachid u'metaltel bereshut harabim. We're discussing different scenarios where somebody is in one domain and the object is in another domain, so he can stand in a private domain and he can carry from reshut harabim. Okay, so he can carry, meaning he can move an item that's in reshut harabim. I could be standing here and I can move something that's over there. Or bereshut harabim u'metaltel bereshut hayachid, or the reverse. U'bavad shelo yotzi chutz me'arba amot. You just can't move it 4 cubits, meaning specifically the case where he's in a private domain, he wants to move something that's in the public domain. He can't move it more than 4 cubits, but he can move it within the public domain. Lo ya'amod adam bereshut hayachid. Okay, we're going to get to a little bit unpleasant gemaras today. You can't stand in a private domain, v'yashtin bereshut harabim, and urinate into the public domain. They're clearly talking about men urinating, at least you have to assume. Or bereshut harabim v'yashtin bereshut hayachid. Or likewise, you can't stand in the public and urinate into the private domain. V'chein lo yarok, and also you can't spit. This would refer also to women, right? You can't spit from one domain to another because you're basically carrying something, passing it from one domain to the other. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af mishenitlash roko befiv, lo yahalech arba amot ad shiarok. Even if you have saliva in your mouth, you cannot walk 4 amot until you spit it out because you're basically carrying the saliva that's in your mouth. This is interesting. You probably never thought about it, but that's what the Gemara says. So first we're going back to the first line about standing in Reshut Harabim and moving an item in the private domain, or the reverse, which our Mishnah said you're allowed to. He had a different version. Matnela means he taught the Mishnah in a different way. Kamei de Rav, in front of Rav. Lo ya'amod adam bereshut hayachid u'metaltel bereshut harabim. His version said you can stand in the private domain and move an item in the public domain. So Amarle, they said to him, Shavakta Rabbanan va'avadet k'Rabbi Meir. What? You left Rabbanan's approach and you went to hold by Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, we're going to see on Daf Kuf Aleph, he talks about that. If you look in Rashi, Dibur Matchil va'avadet k'Rabbi Meir, the last Rashi on Tzadi Chet Amud Bet, Di'iuhu degazar shema yavi etzlo, etc. He, as it says further on, he says you can't do it because maybe you'll accidentally bring it into the private domain. So if I'm standing here and my item's in the public domain, I can't put my arms out there and move it because maybe I'll bring it into my domain. So they say, what, did he leave? That's all of a sudden we're leaving the rabbi's opinion and we're holding by a unique opinion. So who savar midesefa Rabbi Meir reisha nami Rabbi Meir. So he held apparently that since the end of the Mishnah, which is the Mishnah on Kuf Aleph, is like Rabbi Meir, then also we could say this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. But the Gemara says, Velohi, but in fact, that's not the case. It's really the way our version has it, which is the rabbis, which is you're allowed to do it. And then we'd say, Sefer Rabbi Meir v'Reisha Rabbanan. No, really, only the end is Rabbi Meir, but the beginning is actually the earlier part of the Mishnah. Our Mishnah is the rabbi's approach. So again, 2 versions. Can you do it or can't you do it? And that's machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Ubavad shelo yotzi chutz. So now they say you can't take it out of 4 amot. So now they say hahotzi, but if you did, chayav chatat. If you did do it, it sounds like. So now they're inferring from the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, as long as you don't move it 4 cubits. So the Gemara right now, and this is the first version, assumes, we're going to have 2 different versions of reading this, assumes that if you did move it 4 cubits, you'd be chayav chatat. It would be asur mid'Rabbanan. If I'm asur mid'oraita, if I'm standing in the private domain and I put my arm into the public domain and I move it 4 cubits, that will be forbidden by Torah law. But now they say, if you say that, lema masaya leila Rava, this must support the opinion of Rava. It's a bit of a complicated line. There's different ways to understand it. Ta'amar Rava hamavir chefetz mitchilat arba lesof arba ve'viro derech alav chayav. Rava said, and we've seen this many times, that if you're carrying something from the beginning of 4 to the end of 4 cubits, and you did it through the makom p'tur, meaning you did it above the height of 10 cubits, where it's not anymore considered the public domain, then you're going to be obligated. What does this have to do with our case? So first of all, some people say Havirot Derech Halav is something different, and then it's more similar to our case, but we're going to explain it the way we generally explain this. Rashi says here, Patur Valasur, where does Rashi say it? Ha'otzi achefetz. Dibor matchil ha'otzi. If you're motzi achefetz arba amot, chayav. We're assuming maybe he's standing up high. And some people say that what Rashi means is he's on the roof. And then we're talking about, again, that you're in an area that's above, that you're in a makom p'tur. And then you might think, right, that then it's like what Rava said. So here it seems to support that you'd be obligated anyway. So now they say, wait a minute. This can't necessarily support Rava, because again, Rava will say that's forbidden by Torah law. Because mikatani motzi chayav chatat, it never says in the Mishnah that you're actually obligated by Torah law. Dilma imotzi patorah balasol. Maybe it means if you take it out, you're going to be exempt, but it's forbidden. That means rabbinic, if you remember that terminology from Masechet Shabbat. So in the end, they say just because it says you can't move it 4 doesn't necessarily mean it's by Torah law. It could be only by rabbinic law, in which case it teaches nothing about supporting Rava. Now the Gemara says a different version of this whole thing. Ika de Amre, some people say that originally they inferred ha'otzi patorah balasol. If you were to move it 4 cubits, we can assume from the Mishnah that it's only forbidden by rabbinic law. This would pose a question on Rava. Again, chayav, I didn't say this before, but chayav means you're obligated by Torah law, right? Chayav is usually chayav chatat. You have to bring a korban chatat if you did it unwittingly. So now they say, what do you mean? This isn't a problem for Rava because mikatani otzi patorah balasur dilma imotzi chayav chatat. Maybe it means you're obligated by Torah law, in which case it wouldn't provide a problem for Rava, but a support. So again, it's 2 different ways of reading it, and it's just a matter of where they started and where they ended with. Lo yamod adam bereshut hayachid. Now we're talking about and urinate into the public domain. Amar Rav Yosef, hishtim berak chayav chatat. So they say, right, both if you urinate or you spit into a different domain, you're obligated by Torah law. But now the Gemara asks, but don't you need to pick something up and put it down in a space that has 4x4? Now your body isn't a 4x4 space, or the part of the body that it's coming out of, right? Your mouth or where you urinate from isn't a space of 4x4. So how could you say that? So they answer, right, the lake, and you don't have that. So machshavto mishavi lemakom. Because the fact that you want to get it out of your body, that makes it significant. Your intent already turns it as if it's coming from somewhere that's 4x4. Okay, here they're talking about specifically about the akira, the uprooting. When it comes, it leaves one domain, has to leave from a place of 4x4, from a resting place of 4x4. So here we're saying the fact that you want it to leave your body is enough to have it as if it was from 4x4. How do we know that machshavto, your intent, could be imported here? Because if you don't say that, if you throw something and it goes into the mouth of a dog or into the mouth of a furnace, then you're obligated. Now, this is the other part of it. It has to rest on a place that's 4x4, and this isn't. And therefore, just like there, the fact that you wanted to go into the dog's mouth, you threw it to the dog and the dog caught it, that then you'll be obligated again, assuming, let's say it was 4 cubits, you threw it in Reshut Rabim, in the public domain, or he was in private and you were in the public domain, or into the furnace, you'd be obligated because of machshava. So hachanami, likewise here we'll say, machshava meshaveh lemakom. Ba'e Rava. Rava asked the following question. Hu b'reshut hayachid, we're going to get a little more graphic, upi hama b'reshut harabim. Okay, you're standing in reshut hayachid, but the tip of where the man is urinating from is already in the public domain. Mahu, batar akira azlinan, o batar yitzia azlinan. Okay, do we go by the place where it came out of, which is his body, which was then in a different domain than the urine's going to go? Or do we say we go by yitzia, from when it comes out, and then the issue is when it leaves the body to where it ended up, and that's all in the same domain, and then you wouldn't be obligated. Luckily for us, the Gemara answers teku. In others, we don't really know the answer to this question. You're asking a question that's really out there. V'chein lo yarok, and also you can't spit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so then Rabbi Yehuda had said in the Mishnah, let's just go back for a minute. Rabbi Yehuda had said, af mishenitlash roko b'fi. In other words, the first opinion said you can't spit it. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if it's in your mouth, that's already enough that you could be obligated for carrying it for Amod in Reshut Harabim. So now we're going to understand this better. The Gemara says, Af agav de lo hapichba. So it sounds like even if you don't start playing with the saliva in your mouth, like flip it over, just the fact that you have the saliva in your mouth, you're already obligated for moving it. The Hatznam, but doesn't it say in the Mishnah, if you were eating a fig cake with, or a fig with dirty hands, and you put your hand in your mouth to take out a stone that was in your mouth. I don't know exactly what you have a stone in your mouth for, but you put your hands in your mouth for some reason and you touch the dvela. Now the question is the dvela huchshar lekabel tumah? Did it, remember, it has to come in contact with a liquid in order to make it susceptible to impurity. So Rabbi Meir mitameh, Rabbi Yossi mitahel. Okay, so Rabbi Meir says it's tameh because it got wet from saliva. Rabbi Yossi says, no, saliva isn't important. It's not significant here. But Rabbi Yehuda, which is in our Mishnah, said, Omer hipech ba tameh, lo hipech ba tahol. It all depends on whether you move the saliva in your mouth. So here he seems to say that in the Mishnah we just quoted, he seems to say that it has to be moving in your mouth in order to make it significant. But in the other case, in our Mishnah, he said, even if you don't move the saliva, it's already considered saliva in your mouth. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, muchlefet hashita. Rabbi Yochanan says, we switch the shita. Now, usually that means we switch who says what. But here, Rashi says that we, muchlefet hashita, if you look at the Dibur Matchem, muchlefet hashita, toward the center of the page, hichlif Rabbi Yehuda shitato v'yatzai mena. He changed his mind about it. Okay, and the assumption is that first he thought like in our Mishnah, and then later he said, no, you actually have to move it around in your mouth in order for it to be considered significant. Rish Lakish has a different answer. Lo amar la'olam lo tachlif. V'hacha b'mayaskinan b'kicho. There's a difference between saliva and phlegm. Okay, so what he was talking about there, in our Mishnah, they're talking about phlegm. And in the other Mishnah, they were talking about saliva. Saliva has to be flipped. Phlegm is already significant, even if you don't flip it around your mouth. V'hatanya, but wait a minute, doesn't the Braita say, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kicho v'nitlash, okay, the phlegm, and if it gets uprooted. Okay, this means if it comes out of your mouth, right, what it means is if it comes out of your body into your mouth, then you can't walk 4 cubits. So my lav rok v'nitlash, doesn't it mean kicho, phlegm, or saliva? Right now, they're assuming that source included both, in which case Rabbi Yehuda doesn't distinguish. They say, lo, kicho v'nitlash. No, it only means your phlegm and not your saliva. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yehuda omer kicho shenitlash v'chein roko shenitlash, lo yahalech 400 ad sheyarok. Okay, so didn't he already put them in the same category? So they say, so it must be what we said before about the difference that Rabbi Yochanan said, Muchlefet hashita, must have changed his mind. And we reject Rish Lakish, who says that he was talking about phlegm in our Mishnah. Because we just proved that phlegm and saliva are the same according to Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rish Lakish, Kiach bifnei rabo chayav mita. Shneimar, kol mesanai ahavei mavet, al tekhe lemesanai, ela lemasni ai. Okay, so anyone who hates me loves death, meaning they're bringing death upon themselves. From here, they learn anyone who spits in front of his rabbi is obligated the death penalty. Okay, beware kids who like to play around in school and do disrespectful things. Looks pretty serious here. So it says here, how do they read this? Not lemisanai, ella lemasniai. Those who disgrace me, those who do despicable things like spit in people's, right, to spit. So now they say, wait a minute, menas anis, but isn't it menas anis? Right, isn't it accidental? In other words, often what they think it means is like you cough up some phlegm or something, okay? Or you get saliva in your mouth. That's usually not exactly, right? It just kind of happens. So what do they answer? Kiach v'rach ka'amrina. What we're talking about is someone who coughs up the phlegm and then spits it out in front of the rabbi, okay? Which is kind of the way I said in the beginning. But first they understood that what they really meant was, you kind of cough up some phlegm. If you do that, you're obviously not obligated. The death penalty, that's really not your fault. But if you then spit it in your rabbi's face, then you're going to be obligated the death penalty. And this is really because of disrespect of rabbis is basically disrespecting God, because the rabbis are the representatives of God. Just like we saw before with the Sifrei Kodesh, they're kind of the representatives of God, right? The holy books. So therefore, it's as if we are disgracing God. Okay, new Mishnah. Lo yamod adam bereshut hayachid v'yishteh bereshut harabim. You can't stand in the private domain and drink from the public domain. This is the whole thing with the pasei biraot. Remember, they wanted to drink, and then we wanted to make sure that they're in the space, right? They have to be in the pasei biraot, within those boundaries, so that they're kind of in their own reshut hayachid that's in the public domain. So you can't stand in reshut hayachid and drink in reshut harabim. Likewise, you can't be in the public and drink in a private domain. Unless the majority of your body, and again, we saw this mission when we talked about the pasei biraot, the majority of your body, of your head and your body are in that domain where the water is, then you can. And the same thing is true in the wine press. We'll get to this later. If you remember, we also talked about it then. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, Reisha Rabbanan, V'Sefer Rabbi Meir, does this make sense? The Mishnah, the previous Mishnah we just said was the rabbis. This is Rabbi Meir, because obviously if we don't want to allow you to drink in this domain, what's the issue? Because you might take, if I'm standing in one domain and the water's in the other, I might bring the water into the other domain. Isn't that what we just said is only Rabbi Meir? So this seems different than the previous Mishnah where it just said this was the rabbi's opinion, that we're not worried about this. So how does this work in with that Mishnah is basically what they're asking. Amar Rav Yosef b'chafetzin shetzrichim lo v'divrei hakol. This is if there are items that you need, and therefore what they're saying is our Mishnah is talking about items that you need. Because you need them, there's more of a chance you're going to bring them into the other domain. And then we have to assume that the previous Mishnah was talking about items that you don't really need. So now they ask, Carmelit Mai, what about if this isn't a Carmelit? Okay, would you be obligated in the same way? So, right, Reshut HaYachiv, Reshut HaRabim, we understand it's a problem, but what if it's a Carmelit and it's only D'Rabbanan? Amar Abaye, Hihi, it's the same thing. Amar Rava says, what are you talking about? How can you say it's the same thing? He gufa gzera v'hanani kambanin gzera gzera. That's all a gzera, that whole thing. But now we're going to make it's a Carmelit. Not carrying to a Carmelit is D'Rabbanan. We're going to make a D'Rabbanan on a D'Rabbanan. We're going to say, just in case, right, we don't allow Carmelit because you might carry from public to private. So therefore, we're not going to, if you're standing in, let's say, public, and there's a Carmelit there, you're not allowed, and the water's in the Carmelit. You can't take the water from there, even though you're going to stay in the Carmelit because maybe you'll bring it into the Reshut HaRabim when that's only forbidden by rabbinic law. So what's Abaye going to say? Amar Abaye mina minala midekatani. He says, I'm going to prove it to you from here. As it says in the Braita, in the Mishnah, v'chein begat. Okay, what does that mean? V'chein begat means likewise the same thing in the wine press. Okay, so now what he's saying is, why does that prove anything? Because a wine press is a Carmelit, right? It's a space that's bigger than the normal space, but it's not a private domain. It's a Carmelit. So there you see, b'chein begat. So therefore, if the same thing is true in the gat, that's a Carmelit. Comes Rava, and Rava says, Lo, Li'inya Maser. He says, the God had nothing to do with Shabbat and Reshut Rabim and Carmelite and different domains. Nothing to do with that at all. The issue with the God was something totally different. What is that? Li'inya Maser. What is this? This is when you're in the wine press. We learned this already previously. If you want to drink, you're allowed to drink some of the wine as long as you drink it what we call arai. Just, you don't really mean to do it. It's not arai temporary, right? Like not a real sitting, eating a meal, but like on the go. So you can drink on the go. That's fine. And then you're not obligated to, you can drink it without taking Trumot Masrot, without taking the parts that you have to give to the Kohen and the Levi. So now let's explain. Which means that this had nothing to do, you can't prove from the got that we're talking about a Carmelite. And that's basically to knock out Abai, back to Rava, who says, we're not going to make a Gzera on a Gzera. And how do we know this is about Maaser? Ditnan, shotian al agat, bein b'chamim, bein b'tzonein. Whether you mix it with hot water or you mix it with cold water, it doesn't matter. You're allowed to drink there, and patul. Okay, and you don't have to bring any Trumot. You have to take Trumot Masrot. Trumot Masrot are only when you're going to eat something in a significant manner, like a meal. This is not a meal. This is just snacking. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir says. He says, no, you're obligated. In between position, if you mix it with hot water, you're not going to pour any of that wine back into the gat if you decide not to drink it all. So therefore, that's already considered a significant food, because why? If you pour hot water back in, it'll ruin whatever wine is fermenting there in the wine press. But if it's sonein, then you're exempt, because there you're likely to just drink a little and then you might pour the rest of it back in, and therefore you're allowed to. Okay, new Mishnah. Again, talking about different domains and things that are kind of in between two domains. Kolet adam mina maschila lemata me'asara tvachim u'min hatzinur mikol makom shoteh. I'm going to bring up some pictures here. Sorry, I did this well. Just one quick minute. I will bring up the pictures. Here we go. Okay. Okay, here are the pictures. We have a maschila. Maschila is a gutter on under your roof. Okay, we all, right? Many of us have gutters under our roofs to allow for the rainwater. So you can basically catch water. You see this man in the picture? We're in picture 346. He's got the pail lower down from the gutter, and the water goes out of the gutter, down, drops down into the pail. That's allowed. Lamata me'asara tvachim, okay, if you're standing under 10 tvachim. Why? Because the water then drips into the public domain, and you now catch it in the public domain. So you haven't moved it from one domain to another. But minat sinor mikol makom shoteh. If you have a pipe that leads down, in that case, you're allowed to even not wait for the water to drip down out of it into Reshut Rabim. You can put your pail right there, like you see in picture 347. So now the Gemara says, kolet in, okay, this is the next picture, 348. Kolet in, aval mitzaref lo. Okay, you're allowed to catch it from once it's already dripping on its own, but you can't go to the gutter and put, right, that's obvious from the Mishnah, you can't do what it says you can do with the pipe, you can't do that with the gutter. You can't put it right up against, okay, whether it's your hand putting up against or the pail you're putting up against. My time, or what's the reason? I'm Rav Nachman. We're assuming that your gutter is within 3 of the roof, which means that your gutter is in a private domain, and then you're putting the kli, which is in the public domain. And that's going to be a problem. Tanya Namihachi, here's a bright to prove. Omer Adam bereshut hayachid, umagbia yado lamala me'asara tvachim, lepachom mishlosha samuch lagag, v'kolet ubevad shelo yitzaref. Okay, so now we're going to have this Braita. Okay, the Braita is going to prove, you look in Rashi, Rashi says, Tanya Namihachi, the point of this Braita is to prove, okay, that if you're within 3 of the roof, it's like the roof because of Lavud. And anyone who puts a utensil right up against, it's as if he's taking it straight from the roof, and that's a problem. How do we see this from the Braita? Because the Braita says, if you stand, and then now again, there's many, I should already say from when we started this mission, there's many different interpretations here. I'm kind of going to try to follow one track. But the Braita says, you stand in Reshut Yachid. Now, the assumption is we're talking about you're standing on your roof, even though it doesn't say it. You're standing on a roof. You reach out your hand to your neighbor across the way, and you come within 3 next to his roof, and you catch there, okay? You can catch something that's coming off of there, but you can't do tzeruf there because within 3 of the roof is as if you're doing it from the roof, and then you're taking, now this is a little different, you're taking from one person's private domain to another person's private domain. Tanya Idach, right, whereas our Mishnah was talking about from the private domain to a public domain. Tanya Idach, another Braita. לא יעמוד אדם ברשות היחיד ויגביה על ידו למעלה מ10 טפחים לפחות מ3 סמוך לגג ויצרף, אבל קולט הוא ושותה. So the same thing. You can't stand in רשות היחיד, lift your hand up higher than 10 טפחים, within 3 of the roof, and then do tzeruf, which is again, putting your hand right against there, putting your face right against there to drink directly, putting a pail there. All that is forbidden. Aval kolet hu v'shoteh, but you can let it drop down and then catch it after it drops on its own. Minat tzinor mikol makom shoteh. So now they're going to bring a Braita Tana. Im yesh b'tzinor arba'a asur mipnei shu k'motzi mereshut l'reshut. Okay, if the pipe itself is 4 by 4 tvachim, then it's going to be forbidden because then the pipe itself is considered a karmelit, and then you're moving from one domain to another, and then it's going to be forbidden. Okay, we're assuming in the Mishnah must be talking about a tzinor that's less than 4 by 4, which would then be a makom p'tul, and then an exempt space, and then that's why you can do it. Okay, new Mishnah. Bor b'reshut harabim v'chuliato gavoa 10 tvachim. Okay, let's go back to the pictures. You have a pit in Reshut Harabim and the chuliah. Remember what the chuliah is? We've seen this before. You dig out, right? And when you dig, it's kind of like a sandcastle, and you make around the edges, you have the rim goes higher because of the dirt that you dug up from the pit. So if you have a bor in the public domain and the chuliato is gavoa 10 tvachim, so the bor and the chuliah together get up to 10 cubits, so we're in 349. If you have a window right there, you're allowed to take things from the bor into the window. Even though the bor is sitting in Reshut Harabim, but the bor itself is a Reshut Yachid, and you can pass from there. Now, don't generally, when you have a Reshut Yachid to another Reshut Yachid, you need to do an Eruv between them, right? You're not allowed to carry from Reshut Yachid to Reshut Yachid without an Eruv. Here, obviously, you don't need an Eruv because the bor isn't owned by anybody. It has to be something that is owned by someone for the purposes of living. This obviously isn't. Ashpa b'reshut harabim gavoa 10 tvachim. If you have a garbage dump, okay, that's 10 tvachim high outside your window, may not be the most pleasant thing, but chalon she'al gabav shofchin letocha mayim b'shabbat. You could pour water out of your house into the garbage dump. So you might say it's not so convenient to do that. It smells bad, but it's actually convenient in the sense of, I should say it's not so pleasant, but it is convenient to have a way you can just dump it right out your window. So now the Gemara says, B'maya skina, what's our case? Ilema b'smucha lama li chuliah 10. If you're going to say it was right up against the wall, then why do you need to say the chuliah is 10? Okay, because you should be able to bring it. If it's next to it, it doesn't really matter. Right, because if it's right up next to the wall, then we would call that a makom p'tul. Okay, and therefore you'd be allowed to do it. So it must be it's 4 away from your wall, and then it wouldn't be a makom p'tul, and then it would already be a problem. But because it's height of 10, that would be okay. And then that's what we would say. If it didn't have 10, then then you're going to end up carrying from private to private through the public domain, and that will be a problem. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu tema b'smucha, even if it's next to it. There is a chidush here. What's it coming to teach you? Hakamash malan, debor v'chuliato mitzarfin l'asara. To teach you that the bor and the chuliah together, you can count if it's 5 of one and 5 of bor and 5 of chuliah, they can join together to be considered one wall. You might have thought maybe the chulia is softer, it's not as sturdy, right? It's just dirt like in a pile, but they actually do count toward 10, and that's the new law that they're trying to teach you in this Mishnah. Ashpa b'reshut harabim. But sometimes people take things out of the garbage dump or the garbage gets emptied. So aren't you worried about that? He told us the maaseh b'mavoi echad shetzido echad kaleh layam. Okay, here we're going to pull up the picture again. We learned this case earlier in the Masechet. Picture 350. We have an alley. One side is water. The other side, tzido echad kaleh la'ashpa, goes to a garbage dump. So now, this would be a mavoi that's closed on three sides. If you view the water, you have 10 tvachim going down into the water. So that gives you a wall there. And you have the garbage dump, which is a wall on the other side. And on the third side, you have houses. And on the fourth side, it's open to the street. So that would be a mavoi with only three sides, if you count those as walls. He didn't say it's forbidden, but he also didn't say it's permitted. Heter lo amarbo de chashinan shematin hetel ashpa. What wouldn't allow them to make a mavoi? Because he said it could be, okay, this is the next picture. Maybe you'll take away some of the garbage dump. There's no real picture of this, but maybe you'll lower the height of that. Or yalayam sirton, all of a sudden it'll be washed. There'll be sand there. It will basically dry it up and there'll be no longer a wall there. But isur lo amarbo da hakaim kaiminam lechitzot. Right now there happen to be walls, so you can't say, right, there are no walls, so he didn't actually forbid it. So lo kasha. So now, what do you see here? Here we're worried, shematina tel ashpa. But in our Mishnah, we said, we're not worried, shematina tel ashpa. If you have an ashpa, you can carry to it because we can assume, right, that's 10 tfachim high already. So we're not worried, maybe it'll get lower. So now the answer, lo kasha had yachid had rabim. Okay, yachid might end up undoing his garbage dump. And therefore, in that case, we'll be worried, shematina tel ashpa, like the mavoi. But our Mishnah is talking about a case of an ashpa of rabim. And there's always people dumping things in the garbage dump, and it never really will get under 10, and therefore we're not worried about that. Okay, we'll end here for today, and we'll pick up in the next shiur with the Mishnah at the bottom of the page. Have a good day, everybody, and we'll meet up tomorrow.